Hey there, story lovers. We are going to talk about Batman and the significance of the mask. Because Batman wears a mask, of course, to protect his identity primarily, and also to strike fear into the heart of his enemies. Um, However, I think there's some deeper significance about uh, the use of the mask, especially for Batman, but perhaps with any superhero from the comic book world. Um, so I thought we'd begin by discussing the significance of masks as something that transcends different cultures and different time periods. Certainly means different things to different cultures across history, but there's some things that perhaps are universal. So we'll look at some examples of masks in different cultures and time periods, and I've also asked you to do your own research on any particular mask that you find interesting, and to post that. So there might be some overlap between what you've already done, but here we go. So masks have been around since the Stone Age. So this has been a cultural object that's been used throughout the world and has all sorts of different uses and symbolism depending on the context. So, as I said, the essential characteristic is to hide or to reveal the personality of the wearer, and so there's all sorts of different uh, types of materials that are used to make masks. You can use wood, metal, shells, fiber, ivory, clay, stone, feathers, leather, fur, paper, cloth, even corn husks. And masks can vary in their simplicity or their complexity, depending on the situation. And masks typically, not always, but typically, they're worn with a costume that also covers the body as well as the face. So in addition to the costume, the mask essentially creates a new identity that's represented by the mask. And it's the tradition or the context or the culture that defines what that identity is. So, what's interesting is that often throughout our history, um, the mask itself is usually derived from natural forms. Again, not always, but quite often they are. So they often represent, um, spirits from the animal world or the plant world, but quite often the animal world. So, especially in Native American culture. So, so the fact that in this case, Batman's mask represents something from the natural world, the bat, is connected to the greater history of masks. So it's not just Batman. Um, and it's tapping into sometimes supernatural beings or ancestors, uh, or types of people that in a certain culture will provide continuity from the past to the present and presumably into the future. So this sort of supernatural element, as well as the natural world element, fit pretty well with Batman because um, Batman, as a symbol, is meant to terrorize and strike fear into the enemies, as if he's something larger than human. He's bigger than life, and that's what's terrifying to the criminals about him, and maybe inspiring to the citizens who Batman's trying to protect. So, and of course, the bat is closely connected personally to Bruce Wayne, his experience as a young child, falling into a well and encountering um, these bats. So these bats in his origin story um, are symbolized in becoming the bat, and we see in the graphic novel and in all sorts of other references throughout Batman's entire history. The bat is kind of his spirit animal and comes to haunt him and comes to get him at various times. Um, so the idea of the mask changing the identity of the wearers is very important. And there's certain, uh, in some ways, rituals and traditions that are associated with this. And in the case of Batman, um, in the film The Dark Knight by Christopher Nolan, and I think we've probably seen it in other areas as well, or other sources as well. There are some sort of regular guys who decide that they're going to be Batman. So they kind of put on the costume and try to be Batman. I think the Joker calls them copy bats. And so it's kind of cool because the regular person is trying to become the hero by putting on the costume. But of course, they're not the real Batman. Something's missing. So I think there's more to it than just putting on the costume, even though when we put on the costume at Halloween, we like to think we're Batman. But in this case, there's only one real Batman, and that's because there's a certain deeper connection that Bruce Wayne has with this symbol that he's essentially created. And part of it has to do with going into the Batcave, descending into the underworld or the deeper subconscious realm, and his own personal connection is very important, and that's something that not everyone has. You can't just put on the costume and say, "Hey, I'm Batman," and try to fight criminals. You can do that, but it's not as effective, or it doesn't have the same weight or same meaning. So similarly, in other masks throughout the history of time and culture, you can't just put on the mask and then there you go, you're that identity. Each mask has a certain context and traditions that have to be followed and observed for it to have the same power and meaning. So the other important thing about masks is that the identity of the wearer changes, right? So the previous identity, so in this case, Bruce Wayne, is lost, at least temporarily. So when he becomes Batman, he puts on the costume. It's not just Bruce Wayne inside a suit, the bat suit. He literally becomes the character, and Bruce Wayne is lost to a certain extent. And he goes through an almost psychic change. So he becomes the symbol. And again, this is very similar to masks throughout history, that the wearer would, abandon whatever identity, I'm no longer just Chris. I am now, I'm now Batman. Or if I had a college professor superhero identity, I would become Professor, super professor or whatever. And forget about Chris, the regular guy who has a cat and likes to watch Game of Thrones on TV and stuff. So I'd lose that identity and become super professor. So the other thing about masks is that the wearer becomes kind of a partner with the character that they're impersonating. So it's not only just the mask changing the identity of the wearer, but the person wearing it brings their sort of life spark or their vitality and brings it alive. So in other words, the bat suit and the bat mask, or any mask, if it's sitting on the shelf and if it's just there dormant in the bat cave, it doesn't mean much until someone brings life to it, right? Until you bring that spark to it. So there's a relationship between the person and the mask that's very important. So let's carry on and take a look at some masks throughout history. So let's look at a few masks throughout history. Of course, there's several, countless numbers of masks that we could look at, but I've just selected a few, and some of these might be ones that you also looked at. But the classic examples is the masks that you would find in theater, and right here we have the classic masks of tragedy and comedy. This is usually sort of what we use as a symbol to represent something that's theatrical or dramatic. So apart from just comedy and tragedy, which comes from the Greek tradition, it's essentially the actor putting on, and actors always are kind of putting on a mask. They inhabit the character, but with the use of a mask, they quite literally become the character. So it's not just not just method acting. The mask actually transforms their appearance. So this changes the reality on stage. And again, this goes right back to ancient Greece, and the drama in those days, in the earlier days, was a lot more ritualistic than the kind of plays that we might see if we go to Broadway in New York. And the masks often had, it could be elaborate headpieces made of leather, painted canvas, could depict an extensive variety of different personalities, ages, ranks, occupations, and so on. And in some cases, because again, this was a stage performance and they didn't have modern, technological means of amplification, sometimes the mask would even have sort of a built-in megaphone device, so they could project their voice. And the features on the mask would often be exaggerated so that from a clear distance, so from the cheap seats, people could actually see clearly what kind of character this was. So the first use of the mask as a device for theater emerged in the religious practices of ancient Greece. So going even further back, they worshipped a god named Dionysus, who is the god of the harvest, and what they would try to do is try to impersonate the god Dionysus by wearing goat skins and also drinking a lot of wine. Dionysus is often associated with wine. This was partly a religious ceremony that developed into a dramatic performance. So this is one of our earliest masks, at least in the Western tradition. So that's ancient Greece. Moving forward into the Renaissance period in Italy, we also had this is in the 15th century, so in the Renaissance, building on some of the Greek traditions of drama and theater. The Romans developed this style called commedia dell'arte, where they would take sort of stock figures. Remember we talked about the femme fatale as being sort of like a stock character. And each stock character would have their own mask. And again, so they would be very clearly depicted so that you could see from a distance like what character this was. And in this way, you could have just a couple of actors. You could even have just 3 actors. And then by changing the mask, they could, very quickly and easily change their character, change their archetype, or change just change their character. And often these particular masks were often half masks. So you could see the actor's chin and mouth, but the top part of their face would be covered up. So this is a tradition that's referred to quite often. And if you take theater classes as part of a college university program or theater program, usually commedia dell'arte comes up as a theatrical historical exercise. And one of these stock characters is the Harlequin. And this is one of the most well-known characters from the commedia dell'arte tradition, a very common stock character that developed out of what was in commedia dell'arte the trickster or the devil or demon character. And this was later adapted into the French version of these kind of plays. They call them the French Passion plays. And so the Harlequin, appearance-wise, typically had a checkered costume, and his role was typically sort of lighthearted, a servant who was often acting to thwart the plans of his master while pursuing his love interest, and often very witty and resourceful. And then later develops into sort of the prototype of the romantic hero. so this is why we get Harlequin romances, right? That series of novels with the Fabio on the cover and the bodice rippers, right? So, but we're more interested probably in the earlier version of Harlequin, who has again these physical agility and trickster qualities, and is very mischievous. And then when this became also used in England later in the 17th century, in 18th century, the Harlequin was often paired with the character of the clown. And the clown was sort of a mischievous and brutish sort of partner for the more sophisticated Harlequin, who again was more of a kind of witty and romantic character. And I think this fits in very well with the Batman universe because, of course, there's I don't think we see this in the graphic novel, but if you are familiar with any of the other source materials for Batman, including the video games or the comic books, Harlequin is an actual character. She's in this case a female character, so it's not a male character, but it still works. And she's mischievous and a trickster, and is paired up with our number one clown, the Joker, who is certainly brutish. In this case, probably even more sophisticated than the Harlequin. But I think we see some connections to that sort of ancient, or not ancient, but fairly old archetype of the Harlequin. So I thought that was interesting. So masks, of course, are often also used for festive purposes and for carnivals. Well into the 20th century, even or 21st century, we still have Halloween. There's still Mardi Gras in New Orleans, and we still, maybe not as much, but I think people still occasionally have masquerade parties or costume parties. And there's this whole movement of costume play where people dress up and role play in costumes, which can be a lot of fun. And one place in particular that's very well known for carnival masks is Venice in Italy. The Venetians. The mask is almost a piece of artwork. In fact, I've got one. When I went to Venice, I picked one up. And the use of masks in this kind of setting are often to free yourself from the inhibitions and the normal life that you might be leading, so that everyone's pretty much on the same playing field. So whether you're rich, poor, upper class, middle class, lower class, you have an opportunity to be free of that and to basically live it up and have fun. So that's another good use for masks. And in a lot of European and medieval traditions, the wearing of these kind of masks for festivals was an opportunity for the lower class to be pretend that they're the upper class. So it's kind of being king for a day kind of thing, and sort of flipping the social order upside down for a little while. So that's one of the fun and interesting parts of masks in history. And there's several Venetian masks and different roles associated with those that you can look at. One I found that was particularly interesting, considering we're looking at Batman, was the Bauta, which is a mask in which historically the Venetians would often wear when they had to make important political decisions, so that people could cast their vote or say what they needed to say about whatever decision needed to be made with complete anonymity. And I think the mask here, kind of a little bit reminiscent of Batman's mask, especially if you look at the one on the right. And certainly Batman plays a role in making important decisions for the community, more as a vigilante on his own, but certainly acting in that kind of sense. And also, throughout cultures and history throughout the world, often judges would wear masks to protect them from being persecuted later if whoever didn't get the good decision would be upset about it and try to track them down. The same reason that an executioner would have a mask, so that people wouldn't come and get the executioner for chopping the head off of their brother or their dad or whatever. So something and also this particular one, the Bauta, also would wear this long black cape, which again I think the whole costume just reminds me so much of Batman. Uh, so I think that's an interesting one to look at. Um, in Japan, we talked about Greek theater. Japan, they had a tradition, and still do, called the No Theater, and this is very similar to Greek drama, and has been around for centuries. And the masks have 5 general types. There's old people, both male and female, gods, goddesses, devils, and goblins. Usually, the mask is made out of wood with a coating of plaster and lacquered. Usually, as you can see here, and usually they had colors that signified important things. So about the character, white usually characterized a corrupt ruler. Red signified someone who was righteous and had good morals. And black usually was worn by the villain, who, of course, epitomized violence and brutality. And so the masks also, depending on which angle you were looking at them or which way the wearer would tilt them, would often look, the expression would change on them. So the masks were very versatile that way. And this is also a very ritualized form of theater. So there's the actors that would play these roles were very highly respected, and the sort of the master actor, would have a high place within that tradition and also within the society. So again, a very important role to play, and of course Batman, who has a black mask, not a villain, but certainly represents some violence and brutality that he inflicts on his criminal victims, so to terrorize them. So that's a form of theater that and masks that would be interesting for you to check out. And a little bit closer to home, in North America, we have the Iroquois, and they have a type of mask called the false face, the false face society, and these masks are like sort of exaggerated and usually grotesque and freaky looking, and these were used to perform rituals that would ideally heal or cure the disease of members, right? So members of the tribe. So it had sort of a magical, religious tone and feel to it. And so this is something that is part of our more immediate and local culture, and I think important to talk about. And also because Batman, in some ways, is also, his mask is kind of grotesque and exaggerated, and is meant to cure the disease of Gotham City, which is the criminal element and all the corruption that's happening in the city. So his mask is terrifying and grotesque because it's meant to chase away the evil that's in the city, just as the False Face Society was there to chase away the evil spirits. Another one that's interesting is in Africa. This particular one, the Nagil mask, is used as a rite of passage. So it's part of this, and secret societies and masks were very common in African cultures, as a way to provide a ritual of initiation, to have a young man become an adult and become acquainted with the rules of the tribe and maintaining the social stability. So this had a lot of importance in maintaining the continuity between past and present and future, and also the stages of life, the markers as you grow up and grow old of what role you're supposed to perform. And as humans, of course, we like structure, and having it externalized. In other words, you don't have to figure it out on your own, as we often do in modern society. You put on the mask, and that external role just becomes part of you. So it's a rite of passage, and also the idea that these are often secret societies. So Batman, of course, is part of a secret society of superheroes. And even though he's more or less works on his own, he's more of a vigilante. He's got Robin, of course, but it's a secret society. So this is something that has been happening throughout the history of our world, our globe. And there's, of course, many really interesting African masks. That's a very rich culture for masks. So I'd check that one out, and you may have, in fact, checked that out as well. One I don't have an image here for as well is Egyptian masks, which were used as a way of burying the dead and as a funeral rite. So another kind of rite of passage, but the passage from life into death and into the other world. And I think with Batman, for many of us, that's connected to our childhood. So in some ways, Batman is, for us, kind of a rite of passage, or a more modern one. And Batman has kind of grown up in some ways with our generation. So seeing a Batman film kind of connects us to our past, perhaps to our childhood, but also perhaps helps us make more sense of the modern world. And gives us some kind of sense of continuity. Because, of course, Batman's been around for, I guess it's like now 70 years, going back to the 40s. So he's kind of our cultural hero, and kind of represents the values of our society right now. Anyway, we'll get more to that as we go. A couple other ones. Another use of mask is to discipline or punish or shame the wearer. So this is something that was commonly done in medieval times all throughout Europe, in particular in Germany. Not to pick on the Germans, but they use this even in the 20th century during Nazi-occupied Germany. So this is also not just for heroes and rites of passages and so on, but also to punish. And I think of some of the villains in these stories, such as Two-Face and Bane. They have very specific origin stories about why they have the masks and so on. But I think part of it might also be their visible shame, because villains are often struggling with an internal darkness, just the way Batman is. But they wear their evil or their villainy basically on their face, right? The very mask that they're wearing, which has a certain amount of shame to it, I think, because they don't belong to the mainstream normal and good culture. So I think there's something interesting there as well. And lastly, in Mexico, they have the tradition of the masked wrestler, or in the style of what they call lucha libre, which is essentially freestyle wrestling. And quite often, wrestlers in this tradition would wear masks, and there was a lot of mythology built up around these characters who would wear these masks. And in this case, the one I've pictured on the left is the Blue Demon. And this is something that, of course, even we've translated into North American wrestling with the WWE. The wrestlers, or the athletes who perform these characters, whether they wear masks or not, whether you're Mick Foley wearing the Mankind mask, or the Ultimate Warrior, or I think his name's Rex Mysterio. This is something that we still do, and this goes back. The wrestling itself goes back to ancient Greece and Rome, and we still continue to watch it today, even though we kind of know it's fake and staged. But what's interesting about that is that what's important is the theatricality and the stories and the mystery, and in some ways the ritual behind the characters and the masks that they wear. And the wrestlers themselves, the men or women who get in the ring, are quite a bit different than the characters they play or that they perform. But when they're in the ring in front of the audience, they really become those characters. And I think probably struggle to disassociate themselves from these characters, which is why some of them die pretty early, it seems, although that also has to do with drug and steroid use. But anyway, and then, of course, Jack Black kind of did a film that kind of honored and also made fun of this Mexican wrestling tradition called Nacho Libre. So, and that's a film that was, I think, not even that long ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. So masks are, of course, have a rich history and go back, as I said, right to the Stone Age. And we see them still today as being important markers of our civilization and what we value and what we want to be as humans. So, lastly, just as far as masks, before we get into more specifics of Batman, there's the idea of public versus private personas. As I said, Batman, or I mean the wrestlers in that last slide, are quite different. The man or woman who steps into the ring and puts on the mask or puts on that character is quite different in private than they are in this public performance. So we've had a lot of scandals in the last year or two, both in Canada and in North America, about public figures who we come to accept as their public persona, such as Bill Cosby, for instance, or John Gomeshi, the recently disgraced host of the CBC radio show The Q. And going further back, a television evangelist named Jerry Falwell, who publicly had this persona of a righteous religious leader. So what these scandals bring about, Jerry Falwell had some, probably I think some sexual impropriety, and John Gomeshi, of course, had the allegations of abusing and battering women. Bill Cosby raping women, apparently. So it brings up the fact that the public persona that we come to accept and love is quite different than the private personality. So there's a difference between the two. And another recently troubled or somewhat disgraced public figure is the puppeteer behind Elmo, the Sesame Street puppet that is hugely popular and famous. He got into trouble for allegedly having inappropriate relationships with minorities, or not minorities, sorry, a minor. And not just a minor, but also a young boy. So kind of the taboo of having relations with a younger person who wasn't of age, and also a homosexual one. So, which creates a lot of problems if they're performing a cute and cuddly puppet who is meant to be for kids, right? So this whole idea of pedophilia overlapping with a loved puppet. I kind of feel for Kevin Clash, who is this puppeteer, but certainly he struggled with this difference between, and also it's somewhat racialized as well because he's a black guy, right? And I think most people are surprised when they find out that Elmo's a black guy, because we don't associate that that appearance with the character of someone like Elmo, who's very sweet and innocent and high pitched, right? It doesn't match what we think of when we think of a black man, especially when we see them as they're portrayed in like hip hop culture and so on. So it kind of challenges what our perceptions of appearances are, and what the public face is and what the private face is. Anyway, I've rambled on quite a lot about that. So, but just something interesting to pay attention to, especially in our age of celebrity and obsession with celebrity. So let's move on to Batman himself. Batman, of course, isn't the only one to wear a mask in his universe, in his world. In the film The Dark Knight, the little mask up on the top right there, that's the mask that the criminals wear when they go to rob the bank in Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight film, which you may or may not have seen. So quite practically, it masks the identity of the criminal, right, to protect their identity from being caught. And what's interesting in that scene in that film is that the Joker also wears one of these masks, but underneath the mask is yet another mask, the mask of all his makeup and dyed hair and all that stuff that he wears. So not quite a mask, but if you consider the makeup as a mask, it is in some ways. And you'll notice also that in that film that the Joker, when he goes to describe his origin stories about how he got his scars, which is also part of his mask, right? It changes all the time. He's not consistent with it, which is a really chilling and interesting performance choice and writing choice, but also shows how the mask serves to sort of obscure whatever kind of person the Joker may have been, if in fact he is a person, right? Like, it's kind of hard to see anything normal in him, right? So it also has an important role for the villain. Likewise, for Two-Face, he of course wears his duality, or literally being two-faced, quite literally on his face. So we see both kinds of mask. The mask of normality, so his regular human side face, which isn't burned and scarred. And then we see the other side of his face, which is the part that's scarred and crazy and despicable and represents his dark side, right? So he's kind of light and dark. And each side of his face masks the other side in much the same way that we kind of mask internally that struggle that we all have with our good side and bad side. And certainly Batman also struggles with his internal darkness. He's not just a pure good guy with outstanding morals. He struggles with his own demons. So the mask that he wears is not only a symbol to terrorize the criminals, but is also to kind of represent, I think, his own inner darkness that he normally, as Bruce Wayne, would hide. We don't think of Bruce Wayne as being a mask, but it kind of is, because it masks his secret identity and his darkness. And lastly, as it relates to the Joker character, especially from the film The Dark Knight by Christopher Nolan, Heath Ledger, the actor who portrayed the Joker, was highly praised for his performance, and it was one of the best Jokers I've ever seen, and probably you have as well. And but what's interesting is, of course, the fact that he died shortly before the film was released, which sort of brought a certain level of kind of dark mystique to the film itself, knowing that the guy who's performing the role has passed away at such a young age. And if you've read up on it, you'd also know that Heath Ledger was struggling with some drug addictions and also his own inner darkness. And part of it's hard to say whether it's true or not, but part of the mythology surrounding his performance and then later his death is that he became so absorbed in playing the character of the Joker that it affected him personally and privately, so that the Joker, in that sense of madness and chaos and darkness, infected the actor who was just playing the role, and led to his decline and struggles and eventual death. So again, partly mythological. Hard to say how much of that is actually true. That's what's kind of rumored to be true, but it goes to show just how important the mask of the character is to the person that's wearing it, how close that relationship can be, and whether that's for an actor performing a role, or for any of us who are performing any kind of role in our modern world, even if it's just our role as a parent or as a teacher or a student. That role becomes very much a part of who we are, and sometimes difficult to separate the person from the mask that we wear. So that's it for my discussion about masks and the history of masks and as it relates to Batman. And there will be another lecture that will talk more about the Dark Knight Returns, the graphic novel specifically, and other things related to Batman. So I will see you shortly for that lecture. Talk to you soon. Bye.